I would like to begin by telling you guys a story of something that happened to me about 5 years ago. I was walking to one of my friends' homes, and as I was walking, there was a semi that was coming out of a very small back alleyway. It was up on like a hill that the slope came down just a little bit before it got onto the main road. What was unfortunate was that this semi was too tall to make it all the way out, and it started hitting the light posts. And when it did that, it actually ended up breaking and knocking the thing over, and almost fell on me. And what happened was when it did that, it caused a spark, and it lit this person's grass on fire in front of their house. And I actually wouldn't have realized that it was on fire because it didn't look like it was on fire, but their yard started smoking because it was like dead grass. So I was like, okay, I think there's a fire. And before I knew it, within several minutes, their whole yard was in flames, which was very unfortunate for them. But that leads me to my quote today, which is by John Haywood, which says, "There's no fire without smoke." And I agree with this quote, and I think that you can see this in different areas of life. I'm going to touch on sexual harassment, racial discrimination, and an unfortunate religious situation. So first off, with sexual harassment, I'm sure some of you have heard of the Newport Beach doctor who had just been taken to court for committing sexual crimes against women by drugging them with the help of his girlfriend and sexually assaulting them. And some of the smoke that we see from this situation is that there are these women who start to come forward saying that these things are happening to me. And that kind of gives us a clue to that there's a fire situation, like a dangerous situation going on, which we should be aware of. The second area, which is racial discrimination, is something that we're talking about in one of my English classes, where people of color are coming forward saying these terrible things are happening to me. People are using these microaggressions against me, and they're kind of just being written off when really this is the smoke of a deeper fire situation where there's danger. These people are really being hurt. They're being shot at when they shouldn't be shot at, and so many other situations which we won't go into today. And the last area is religiously, for example, my background, where you see lots of children who have like bruises, or they have like, they're very awkward and have trouble in certain like social situations, and a lot of that has to do with them being sexually assaulted. And that had been overlooked for many, many years until they finally were starting to get reported. But those were signs like the smoke in this situation of a greater fire, which was children being abused. So I hope that from this quote, which is, "There's no fire without smoke," we will become more aware in our society of these signs that when there's smoke, there's potentially a fire, so that we can investigate and maybe get to these situations before they become a perpetual problem. Thank you.
All right, well, I like the reference to the older story. You tied it into the subject in a pretty interesting way. It sounds a little literal, but it worked. You do identify the quote, and you've got a point of view on it, and that was fine. There's an excellent preview of what the supporting structure is going to be, so it should be easy to follow. So the mechanics here, especially in the opening part, are solid. Your supporting material, I thought you found good examples to talk about. And even though they're not always as detailed as they might be, they sound fuller because you present them confidently, you speak through them fluidly, you move to the next point, and you sound like you know that you're done with that point when you go on to the next one. That's one of the things that people need to learn a little bit of in doing these presentations, is that stretching it out to fit the 5 minutes is not necessarily as important as making sure that you make your point, it sounds interesting, and you are confident when you're doing it. I think you'll get a lot more out of the presentation and have a better relationship with the audience if you can do those things. And Dani, I thought you did a very good job of those kinds of things. The presentation issues, your voice, I think, is very fluid while you're speaking. There's a good rhythm to it. Facial expressions are okay. Your eye contact with the audience, this is one of those things that's a little bit awkward because you do look up, but it looks to me mostly like you're looking kind of in front of us. Instead of looking at us and engaging us, it's kind of like you're just looking in the direction of the audience, sort of at chest level, and not really talking to people. I don't see you pausing to talk to one or two people at a time, and then moving on to the next person. It always seems like you're kind of not quite scanning the audience, but like I said, directing things almost down a little bit. At the beginning of the speech, you told your story to just one part of the room, by the way. That seemed a little odd. So when you're doing the whole introduction, it's all to this one section of the room over here, and the rest of us were just kind of watching you talk to them instead of having you talk to all of us. So I think that that's maybe something that you need to work on. Your gestures, you have a tendency to kind of grip your own hands and do the kind of sweater clutch thing, which, by the way, I understand right now because suddenly it got cold in here, and so you're kind of doing that sort of thing. And that's, if there's nervous energy, that's where it's coming out. I thought you had a good summary and a very solid close to the presentation. And that's always, like I've said to several people already, if you want to finish and leave a good impression, tell people what your point was and make it sound like you knew that you were done. And that'll go a long way toward leaving people with that kind of impression. Thank you.